Salam to everyone. We are going to learn about A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. In this video, I will give you thematic analysis of A Passage to India. Here I'll also be discussing some theories which are related to themes. If you want, you can only use the concept and skip the theories. There are certain themes which are following: the practice of hegemony and power in colonialized and imperialized British India is shown in the novel. Also, the cultural clash is visible which comes in way of friendship. Next comes the theme of division between people of India and the unity irrespective of all things. At last, there is the psychoanalytic approach which is the most crucial one in this novel. The British come in India through imperialism, which means that they took over economic and political domination over India. They firstly started it with trade, but then seeing the enrichment of India, they started getting physical control over India, which means that they conquer India by force. Now they were in power and they exercised this power over the Indians. In chapter 2, when Major Calendar calls Aziz to meet him urgently, then Aziz says that he has found out our dinner hour, that's all, and chooses to interrupt us every time in order to show his power. A theory of cultural hegemony by Antonio Gramsci could be applicable here, which describes how ruling class dominates other classes by manipulating the culture of a society in order to present their views as being common sense. Ruling class is convinced that their ideology is the only ideology, so they exercise their power over the inferior ones, the Indians. One example of this could be when Ronnie responded to Mrs. Moore and said that, "I am out here to work, mind, to hold this wretched country by force. We are not pleasant in India, and we don't intend to be pleasant. We have something more important to do." This sentence, "we have something more important to do," shows that ruling class do everything whatever they want to do. Now this attitude of English automatically creates a negativity in Indians about them, and it will lead towards a cultural clash or ideological clash. However, there is another important theme of friendship in this novel. In starting chapters, Forster shows his concern that whether or not it is possible to be friends with Englishmen. Now the story revolves around the urge of Dr. Aziz to have English friends. His concern about this is also shown when he says to Mrs. Moore that, "You understand me, you know what others feel. Oh, if others resembled you." He wanted all English to understand Indians. However, he succeeded somehow to get friendship of Mrs. Moore and Mr. Fielding. Forster describes his feeling as, "These two have strange and beautiful effects on him. They were his friends, his forever, and he theirs forever." But despite of all this, there came the cultural clash between them, due to which friendship cannot be sustained at any cost. Like the views of Major Calendar about Aziz and his hypocrisy is shown when he says, "No grits, no guts." Now he's saying this about Dr. Aziz, that he has no grits, no guts. But then he's saying, but in his heart he knew that if Aziz and not he operated last year on Mrs. Greyford's appendix, the old lady would probably have lived. Not just because of cultural or ideological clash, he's not admiring the qualities of Dr. Aziz. Apparently, he's saying that he has no grits, no guts. This cultural and ideological clash is shown by using the terminologies Orientals and Occidents in this novel. It is theory of Edward Said which discusses a style of thought that gives distinction between Orients and Occidents. Now Orients are the Easterns, who are uneducated, who are emotional, they are senseless, ill-mannered, they have no ideology, and they are informal. On the other hand side, there are Occidents, Who are the Westerns? So the Westerns are educated, they are rational, they are sensible, they are mannered, and they had their powerful ideology. So they are ruling over Indians. However, they are formal. So this theory shows that Orients and Occidents are too much different from one another. There's a dialogue in the last chapter of the novel which shows that no matter what, this thought pattern after all will not allow Indians and English to be friends. And it is when Aziz says, "And alas, the two nations cannot be friends." And remember, Aziz was the character who was most welcome towards the Indians. But now he is saying that the two nations cannot be friends. It means that all his hopes are vanished because of this cultural clash and the differences in thought. The most important psychoanalytical approach in novel can be linked with two psychologists' theories. First of all, theory of Sigmund Freud says that human behavior is influenced by unconscious memories, thoughts, and urges. He says that human mind has three layers, out of which consciousness is the tip of iceberg, while unconsciousness is like the depth of ocean. Secondly, the theory of Carl Jung says that through unconsciousness approach, one can realize his or her self-archetype, which will lead towards individualism or his own individualization. He also divides human psyche into three. One is ego, then personal unconsciousness, and then collective unconsciousness. Now here you will see theme related to personal and collective unconsciousness. Theory of Freud can be related when Adela thinks consciously, which is the tip of iceberg. But because of caves, she goes into depth of her mind, which is unconsciousness. Her condition is described in chapter 15 as the discovery had come so suddenly that she felt like a mountaineer whose rope had broken. Then she come towards self-realization. She regretted that neither she nor Ronnie had physical charm. She realizes the actualness of her and Ronnie's relationship. Now, the mystery of Mrs. Moore is that because of ego, she go into her unconsciousness. As the crush and the smells she could forget, but the other ego began in some indescribable way to undermine her hold of life. Then she started thinking about her whole life and religion, which is shown in chapter 15 as, but suddenly at the edge of if her mind, religion appeared, poor little talkative Christianity. Her memories and thought patterns led her towards unconsciousness and then towards self-realization. Now focus on it, that the two ladies go into unconsciousness, which we will say that collective unconsciousness of Jung's theory, which led them towards self-realization. Then at the end, what Freud say happens, that memories and thoughts of a person influence his behaviors. So Mrs. Moore's faintness and Adela's false allegations were the result of their memories and thought patterns. Now there's another concept discussed in this or mentioned in this novel, that is unity of all living things, which means state of being joined as a whole. It is a religious concept that shows spiritual connection. The best example of which we can take is of Professor Gorbuli. In all novel, he is a spiritual or a religious personality. But in the last part of the novel, his concepts are much more emphasized. Like all creation is one, this is the concept of Hinduism. And then moving towards the unity of all living things, we can say that he was taking everything beyond of its religion, its color or creed. Like he agrees with Mrs. Moore's thoughts. In novel this is written, he was a Brahmin, she Christian, but it made no difference. So there's a spiritual connection in this world that is connecting all the things. Now if we take the example of Mrs. Moore, she takes Dr. Aziz as an human, as an individual, without considering that he's an Oriental, he's an Indian, or he's not an Occident, he's not of white color. Likewise, the wasp. When she saw it, she also took it as an individual. She found that the tip of the peg was occupied by a small wasp. She had known this wasp or his relatives by day. "Pretty dear," said Mrs. Moore. She is saying pretty dear to a wasp, and so is taking it as an individual, and is showing that there is a spiritual connection in the world by which everyone is connected. Then the echo in the caves. It also shows a connection. Now, after hearing the echo, Mrs. Moore placed everything in boom of the echo. She connected everything of her life, from her children to her religion. In chapter 14, it is mentioned hope, politeness, the blowing of a nose, the squeak of a boot all produce boom. So that wholeness of the boom or the echo had overcome Mrs. Moore, and she was now a part of the spiritual connection, the unity of all living things in the world. Then coming towards division in India. In India, there were many religions, castes or cultures, so the division was obvious. Whenever Muharram approached, Muharram is a religious month of Muslims, whenever it approached, there were disputes between Muslims and Hindus, and then British had to send the troops to stop all this mess. Thanks for watching our video. If you like it, then do subscribe our channel.